There was a house in Auschwitz, a red brick house with a garden, a swing set for the children, and a vegetable patch where the family grew tomatoes in the summer. The windows looked out over a simple fence. Beyond that fence, over 1 million people were gassed, burned, and reduced to ash. The man who lived in that house went to work every morning, returned home for dinner each evening, and slept soundly through the night. His name was Rudolf Höss, and he was not a monster in the way people imagine monsters. He was something far more unsettling. Rudolf Franz Ferdinand Höss was born on the 25th of November, 1900, in Baden-Baden, a quiet spa town in southwestern Germany. His father was a devout Catholic, a former colonial soldier who had made a promise to God that his son would become a priest. Rudolf grew up under that weight, strict, religious, suffocating. He served as an altar boy, went to confession regularly, and was raised to believe in discipline, obedience, and duty above all else. Those 3 words would follow him for the rest of his life, though by the end, they would mean something entirely different from what his father had intended. When the First World War broke out, Höss was 14 years old. By 15, he had lied about his age and enlisted. He fought in Iraq, in Turkey, on the Eastern Front. And by 17, he had become the youngest non-commissioned officer in the entire German army. He was decorated multiple times. He saw men die in ways that would have broken most people. But Höss did not break. He adapted. War became normal to him in a way that made peacetime feel strange and formless, like something he had never learned to inhabit. After the war ended, he drifted. Germany was collapsing. The Kaiser was gone. The country he had fought for no longer existed in any recognizable form. He joined the Friore, one of the brutal paramilitary groups that filled the vacuum left by defeat. Men who had learned to kill and had not yet found a reason to stop. In 1922, he met Adolf Hitler at a rally and joined the NSDAP almost immediately. He was 21 years old, and for the first time since the trenches, he felt like he belonged somewhere. In 1923, Höss was involved in the murder of Walter Kado, a school teacher suspected of betraying a nationalist activist to the French occupation authorities. Höss and several others beat Kado, cut his throat, and shot him in a forest in Mecklenburg. He was convicted of murder and sentenced to 10 years in prison. He served 5. Inside, he read. He thought. He came out harder than he went in, more convinced than before that the world was a place where only strength and loyalty mattered. By the time he was released, the Nazi movement had grown into something he could genuinely build a life inside. In 1934, Heinrich Himmler personally invited him to join the SS. Höss accepted without hesitation. He was assigned to Dachau, the first concentration camp, where he trained under Theodor Eicke, a man who had turned brutality into bureaucracy, who had written the rule book on running a camp with efficiency and without sentiment. Eicke taught us that prisoners were not people to be pitied. They were enemies of the state, and treating them with anything other than cold indifference was weakness. Höss absorbed every lesson. He rose steadily through the ranks. He was competent, reliable, unquestioning. He did not drink excessively, did not lose his temper, did not cause political problems for his superiors. He was exactly the kind of man the SS needed, not a sadist who enjoyed the work for personal reasons, but a professional who did the work because he had been told to. That difference is what makes Höss so difficult to look at directly. In May 1940, Höss was appointed commandant of a new camp being constructed near the Polish town of Auschwitz. The SS called it Auschwitz. It began as a camp for Polish political prisoners, a place to hold and punish people the Reich wanted removed from society. Höss oversaw the construction personally, dealing with constant logistical problems, insufficient supplies, inadequate infrastructure, and a location with terrible drainage that meant the ground was perpetually waterlogged and disease spread almost immediately. He complained about these problems in reports to Berlin. He wanted the camp to function properly. That was what mattered to him: functionality. In the summer of 1941, everything changed. Höss was summoned to Berlin and brought directly to Himmler. What Himmler told him in that meeting was not written down at the time, but Höss described it in detail later. Himmler told him that Hitler had ordered the final solution of the Jewish question and that the SS would be responsible for carrying it out. He told Höss that Auschwitz had been selected as the primary site because of its location, its rail connections, and its existing infrastructure. This information was to be shared with no one except those who absolutely needed to know. And then he told Höss to figure out how to do it. Höss returned to Auschwitz and began planning. He had already witnessed gassing experiments at the camp. Soviet prisoners of war had been killed with Cyclone B in the basement of Block 11 in September 1941. Höss had observed the results with what he later described as relief. Shooting, he felt, was psychologically damaging to the men doing it. He had seen what mass shootings were doing to the inert group, the drinking, the breakdowns, the suicides. Gas was cleaner, more efficient, less personal, in a way that to Höss's mind was an act of mercy toward his own men. He expanded the camp. Auschwitz II, known as Birkenau, was constructed 2 kilometers from the main camp beginning in late 1941. It was built on an enormous scale, designed to hold hundreds of thousands of people with dedicated facilities for mass extermination. The crematoria at Birkenau were architectural achievements in the most grotesque sense of the phrase, purpose-built, carefully engineered, capable of processing thousands of bodies every day. Höss oversaw every detail of their construction. He corresponded with the company that manufactured the crematoria furnaces about capacity and throughput. He reviewed the ventilation systems in the gas chambers. He signed the paperwork. The deportations began flowing in from across occupied Europe, Jews from Poland, France, the Netherlands, Greece, Hungary, from everywhere the Reich had reached. They arrived by train, often after journeys of several days, with no food or water in sealed cattle cars, so crowded that many died before the doors opened. They arrived on the ramp at Birkenau and were sorted. Those deemed fit for labor went to the camp. Those who were not the elderly, the children, the sick. The majority of every transport were told they were going to shower facilities. They were told to remember which hook they had hung their clothes on so they could find them afterward. They were walked into the gas chambers and the doors were sealed behind them. Höss watched this process. He did not participate directly. He observed, assessed, made notes on efficiency. There were problems early on. The crematoria could not keep up with the killing rate, and bodies had to be burned in open pits, which caused problems with the water table and generated smoke visible for miles around. Höss solved these problems methodically, the way an engineer solves problems, by adjusting variables until the numbers worked. At the peak of operations in the summer of 1944, when Hungarian Jews were being deported in enormous numbers, Auschwitz-Birkenau was killing and cremating over 10,000 people per day. Höss himself later testified that approximately 1.1 million people were killed at Auschwitz during his time as commandant. Historians have largely confirmed figures in that range. He gave this number at the Nuremberg trials, without apparent emotion as operational data. While all of this was happening, Höss lived in the house with the garden. His wife Hedwig loved the house. She called it paradise. She said so explicitly in letters and later in interviews. They had 5 children who played in that garden, attended birthday parties, grew up within walking distance of the crematoria. Hedwig tended her roses. Höss came home in the evenings. They had guests for dinner. By every outward appearance, they were a normal family living a normal life. and that is the thing that refuses to be resolved, no matter how long you stare at it. In late 1943, Höss was promoted and transferred to the SS Main Economic Administrative Office in Berlin, technically moving away from direct command of Auschwitz. But in the spring of 1944, with the Hungarian deportations beginning, he was sent back temporarily to oversee the operation personally. The SS called it Action Höss. He returned, supervised the murder of hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews over the course of a few weeks, and then left again. He described this period in his memoirs as one of the most demanding of his career due to the logistical challenges involved. When the war ended, Höss disappeared. He had false papers, a fake name, and was working as a farmhand in Schleswig-Holstein under the name Franz Lang. He had a beard. He kept his head down. He might have remained hidden indefinitely, but the British were looking for him, and they had leverage. They arrested his wife and interrogated his son. Hedwig refused to say anything. His son Hans, who was 15 years old, told the British where his father was. Whether he understood the full weight of what his father had done is unclear. In March 1946, British soldiers raided the farm at 3 o'clock in the morning. Höss was dragged out of bed. One of the British officers later wrote that Höss showed no resistance, no emotion, nothing. He was taken into custody, cleaned up, and within days was being transported to Nuremberg, where he testified at the trial of Ernst Colton Brunner. He sat in the witness box and described the operations at Auschwitz in calm, bureaucratic language, as if giving a report to a superior officer. The defense attorneys had hoped he might complicate the testimony against their clients. Instead, he made everything worse. He confirmed everything. He expanded on it. He seemed almost relieved to be telling someone exactly how it had worked. After Nuremberg, he was handed over to Polish authorities. He was tried in Warsaw in 1947, convicted of murder, and sentenced to death. During his time in custody, he wrote his autobiography, a document that is one of the strangest things to come out of that entire era. It is detailed, reflective, and deeply self-serving in ways that Höss does not seem to recognize. He describes his guilt, his doubts, his love for his family, his commitment to duty. He writes about the suffering of the prisoners with something that reads almost like regret, but then pivots to explaining why he had no choice, why he was following orders, why the responsibility lay elsewhere. He cannot see himself clearly. That inability is perhaps the most honest thing about him. He was hanged on the 16th of April, 1947, at Auschwitz itself, on a gallows, erected a few meters from the crematorium he had built. The execution was carried out in the morning. The rope was attached to a hook on the wall of the building. He died at the site of his own work, which was either justice or irony or both, depending on how you look at it. Rudolf Höss never claimed to be a monster. He claimed to be a soldier, an administrator, a man who had been given an impossible task and had carried it out because that was what he was trained to do. He claimed that the real criminals were the men who had given the orders, not the men who had executed them. He believed this, or at least he wrote as if he believed it until the end of his life. What he never fully grappled with, what his memoirs circle around without ever landing on, is that at every stage he had a choice, not an easy choice, not a safe choice, but a choice. He chose Tao over something else. He chose to stay. He chose to build. He chose to expand. He chose over and over again the path that led to that ramp at Birkenau. And he chose it each time with competence and care, without hesitation. The house in Auschwitz still stands. It has been preserved as part of the memorial site. You can walk past the garden where his children played. The swing set is gone, but the building is there. Red brick and ordinary, looking out over everything.